Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. This is an episode of She Said, featuring Katrina B, who is, what is your handle on Letterboxd, Katrina? Is it actually Katrina B, or is it something else? I just
Actually,
completely spaced.
I haven't messed with that. I think it might be my full name. I think it might be Katrina M. Barnett.
Okay. Yeah.
But you can also find me as Katrina B. I'm there somewhere.
It's kind of weird, isn't it? Like how your name is not necessarily your backslash. Like your, yeah, I always found that odd because mine, for the longest time, my name was Amy Catherine. So it was not my last name. It was just my middle name. And then my name, if you put it in the box, the backslash was it's just a flower, which is a line from Adaptation. But those two things were not together.
Yes. I now when I sign up for things, I tend to put in the full name because I'm like, I'm old now and it seems fine and people can find me if they want to. But then I also don't like having my whole last name splashed all over.
I know.
It's weird. So
yeah,
the older I get, the more I'm like,
who cares?
It's all out there anyway.
I was going to do that initially, for this pod. It was just going to be like Amy H or Amy C or something. And then I was like, no, this is dumb. I need to
commit for it.
I have to commit if I'm actually going to do it. It seems like, because they could figure that out anyway. If people really want to, they can find anything out. So
it's so true. I mean,
it's kind of scary, but
it is, but it's also like, I don't know, when it comes to when you're making content, especially quality stuff like this, I mean, totally content, but anyway, then that's great because that way people can find more of it. Right. Because
True.
then your name is on all of those things. So that's nice.
Yeah. But then you can't ever take it back.
True.
Once it's out there.
True. It's there forever, as a lot of people have learned.
Total tangent. But yes, follow Katrina. Katrina, I don't remember actually how I found you. Who are you connected to that I know?
It was probably through Jetta.
Okay, so it was Cupcake.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay.
We've been following each other for I don't know, time is flat to me now, but I know it's pre-pandemic that we were following each other. So I'm sure you came just a little bit after that.
Yeah. And you, I mean, like me, there's not a lot of women on Letterboxd that I know.
Same.
There aren't. So when you find one, you kind of cling to it and are like, oh my gosh, it's a woman.
Tell me more. Tell me all of your thoughts.
What are you thinking? Well, and something that intrigued me, I think you didn't always have the cat emoji in your name. You used to have, but you've always had something there, right? Because I saw that you recently changed it. But you've got in your bio about what you have studied and what you're interested in. And so that always sparked something in my head that's oh, her name is Katrina and she likes cats.
She's into cats. Yes.
She's into cats.
You asking me if that was my real name made me laugh.
Yes. When we did our mic check, I was like, Katrina, let's be real. Real moment, real talk.
Well, and as I said, then I don't have the nuance. If that was my made up name, it would have been with a C instead of
C.
Yeah, I'm not that interesting. So,
So
it was just predestined. It was a cat thing. I don't know.
It was a cat thing. It was meant to be.
Yeah.
So, can you, since this is part of the reason that I was drawn to you in the first place, tell us about what it is that you studied and what got you interested in combining that with film, specifically?
Yeah. Well, so I got my master's in film studies. I actually never know what it's called specifically. It's criticism in media or something like that, but it's film studies. Yeah. And the thesis that I wrote for that degree was on Catwoman or cat/women in cinema, which was it's always been an interesting subject to me because growing up, I was really attached to the Catwoman character and women who were associated with cats. It's just been in film forever and in media forever. And so that was something that I had always kind of been attached to. And so when it came down to writing my thesis, that was something that sprang to mind because I was interested in sort of the history of it, going back to that. And what I ended up turning up was really interesting. And I'm still really excited about it, which is that it really is like this massive kind of network of these characters, and it overlaps with like the femme fatale and the witch and that kind of thing. So it's the Catwoman archetype, and it's usually a male authored character, and it's sort of she's a signifier or a shorthand for a disruptive woman, like the femme fatale, right? And the interesting thing about that, though, is that as viewers, even men, we're usually very drawn to that character. Like I said, as a kid, I was always very attached to her, right? She's very interesting because she's having some kind of fun being
yes,
bad.
she seems to be having a good time.
Yes,
Yeah, like
exactly.
kind of like in a playful manner, you know,
Yes,
like
exactly.
a devious, mischievous playfulness.
Yes, she's a trickster, and there is like a playfulness to her, and a sexuality to her, and an individuality, and a solitary. She is usually an outsider and that kind of thing. Anyway, so I thought it was really interesting how male authors conceived of this archetype as a signifier for badness and disruptiveness, disruptive women, and stuff like that. When it was something that we were like generally very drawn to, which is a part of her whole thing. And when you look at that a little bit closer, what is funny about that to me, and that I wrote my whole thesis on, is that it's men, like we were kind of talking about before, these male authors sort of telling on themselves by giving you this archetype that has negative connotations, is meant to be villainous, but it's a stand-in for what they're afraid of. They're expressing a fear and they're expressing a fear, any kind of fear, when you put a villain in something. But when you see this particular archetype, this female archetype appearing over and over again, it's usually a sign that that's something that they're afraid of, right? So it's this patriarchal construct that they're presenting again and again of women and cats. So this is something that is scary to them. It's the unpredictability. It's the randomness. It's the sexuality. It's an ability to manipulate and things like that. And so that's being put forward as a scary idea.
But then but then there's also desire, right, Katrina?
Absolutely.
Like it's like fear and desire. It's like, I mean, it's both. It's not just, it's like, I don't know, what do I want to say? Like something that's bad for you, but that you're drawn to. I mean, there's so many examples of this, but like, it almost reminds me of like a siren call, or like just something that's luring you to your doom, but you're kind of like happily entranced.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's like the statement of it, right? Is that don't be like drawn in by this. It's like, it's very appealing and everything, but she's bad. She's bad. But we have to like make her desirable. So, and she's usually a sex object in most of these movies.
Right.
But it's the idea of like, yeah, and what could be more frightening than something that's like beautiful and sort of ineffable, like interesting. It would be more frightening than that. And I think that's what it all comes down to for me, is I think that's really empowering. I would argue that these Catwoman characters are subversively feminist because they represent a real power. That's what's being expressed. And when we express fear, we are inadvertently giving the thing power, right? So when these characters are put forward as something that's frightening, what we're saying about the authors is that they're afraid of that, right? So that's what I think is exciting about the Catwoman thing in general. I think it's really fun, and I think it's really positive. Like, it's a dark way of looking at it because a lot of these characters end up murdered or punished or whatever. But the idea that that a woman is frightening because of her laughter or her sexuality or again, her individuality, that alone is scary. is very exciting. I think it's very exciting.
Well, and I was going to ask you, Katrina, along this vein, this thought just occurred to me. How, like, if you could have designed Catwoman instead of a man, in what ways would she, as an archetype, been different? Do you think that you would have modeled her different or made her look different or act differently? Like, it, because I know that there is significance to what you're saying in terms of like this coming out of a male mind, right? But then on the flip side of that, it's like, okay, let's pause it. Like, what if this had been created by a woman, but specifically you? How would that, in what ways would you change that? In what ways do you feel like it would have been more, I don't know, impactful or well-rounded? Or do you feel like you like it just as it is?
Well, yeah, because that's a really interesting question, but that's a tricky question, right? Because she's that archetype in general, and that character is so steeped in years and years of what this idea is and what desire is and that kind of thing. I think at this point I like her very much. I like this Michelle Pfeiffer version.
Yes.
I like that, even though it's entirely from a man's mind. But I like the subversiveness of that. I think if I had my druthers, in general, there would be less objectification, but
like, you think she would have looked more normal, like more, or not normal, average, like not this like stunning. Obviously, I mean, we're going to talk about Batman Returns here, and Michelle Pfeiffer is gorgeous, and the reason that she is so that she can captivate, right? And to be fair, you know, we're talking about like our standard level of attractiveness, right? I mean, not like around the world, there's not everybody culturally would say, but I mean, in terms of like where we're coming from, this person is like peak hotness. So, and if she weren't that way, it would render her ineffective, right, for the role. So I just wonder how it would be if she were designed differently than that, because it seems like it would change the whole nature of the character.
I think it does, especially if we're talking about this version in particular.
Yeah.
It's a heightened world anyway.
Right.
I am surprised watching it now. I am surprised that she's actually so thin, not to be so focused on body type, but that is interesting. And I think that speaks more to the time than anything else. You know, you always picture the femme fatales as being a little bit more curvy. Yeah. But
I thought that too. I think that's because she's so agile, maybe.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Like
doing the flip flops and whatnot.
Well, but she's
very
like
heightened world.
Right. I think she's thin. So, I mean, this is just my POV, but like, I felt like she was thin so that she could do all the, you know, like slinking and moving, and like I felt like it was more practical than, but that just might be.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. But yeah,
she's like climbing stuff and.
Yeah. In terms of like overall like design, and what one would do with that character. I mean, I think we're seeing that more now with female voices just being more involved in media, but it's still hard because we're not starting from zero. We're starting from this long line of archetypes in general and just like creative ideas. And so anything you do, you're kind of building off of something else. So I think it more makes sense that instead of just like creating like a Catwoman from scratch, we're sort of reclaiming and celebrating what we're getting out of the more classic versions of it, or the evolution of it.
Well, I do think it's kind of interesting. Like so Batman Returns is the 1992 film directed by Tim Burton. I think that it's interesting too that the outsiders in this film, but in like Batman, generally speaking, like the people who are outcasts aren't necessarily flawed physically. Like Bruce Wayne is an outcast, but he's like a very good looking rich dude. She's an outcast and she's very attractive and she's kind of fumbly and stuff as Selena, but like it is interesting because you have this juxtaposition between the very attractive characters, but then you have like the Penguin and the Joker in the first one where they're disfigured or there's something that's deeply wrong on the outside, even though everybody is kind of dark on the inside. So it is interesting to me that we have Catwoman who's just like gorgeous, but also feels very like she doesn't fit in at all and that she can't fit in, like intrinsically.
Yes. Yes. And actually, that kind of leads to why I picked this in the first place. When you were asking about what you do in this section of the podcast, which is asking the guests to pick a film that they sort of connect with womanhood in general.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I think is it's really interesting about the Selena character in general for me personally, because we were talking about context before, so I'll give you a little bit of that. In the 90s, we were in like the post-feminist era, right? Which is like, don't worry about feminism anymore. You won. And so everything's fine now. And so that was sort of like feminism in general was sort of commodified and sold to us in a different way than womanhood was in the 50s. And so the main message, and I remember it as a kid, the main message was like, you can do anything. Just make sure that like you're gorgeous and sexy, and perfect basically while you're doing it. Right. Like you can have a family and you can be feminine, but you can also be a badass bitch and do your thing. And I don't know, sex was a lot more, I feel like, in our advertising at that point. Now I feel like we're going in the opposite direction, but anyway, so that was kind of the prevalent mode, I feel like, for women, which was like it was a lot of confusing,
conflicting
messages. Yes. Yeah. And
like be pretty, but also it doesn't matter what you look like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, totally. Yes.
Right.
It was the age of girl power too, which was like we're being sold feminism, right? It was like girl power, it's fine, everything's good, yay, Spice Girls, my love. But anyway, yeah, so you see that playing out with Selena, and I really, really like that, especially the more and more that I watch it. She's trying so hard to be all the things. You see that in her apartment. She's trying to kind of fulfill this like feminine ideal, but then she's trying to hold down a job and be impressive that way. And she's just kind of failing at everything. And she has no self-confidence. And she's constantly receiving these messages because she works for Shrek, the department store, and they're constantly telling her, like, they build women there basically, right? She's always getting the phone calls saying like, oh, try the perfume and the face cream and her mother is calling her and her dates are always canceling and her boss gives her a hard time and all that stuff. So, and she can't even like talk to Batman. Batman doesn't even care.
And she like spills things and she's just extremely clumsy. And then that like, she's like, oh, I've got an idea for this. And they all look at her and then she can't say it. I mean, there's just like an intense insecurity and just like you said, she's just confused as to what a woman is.
Right. But what she's supposed to be.
Right.
And then the transformation scene when she comes back to her apartment after she's been like raised from the dead by the cat, which I love. That scene I think is just, I know that scene is just amazing to me because it's, it's very obvious. It's very like on the nose, but there's a lot of stuff there. It's just really powerful to me that she comes home and she's like experiencing like those messaging again. And she snaps. And actually the minute that I love is when she fully snaps, she gets a phone call. It's on her answering machine. And it's an ad from the Shrek department stores. And it's talking about buy this perfume and your boss will want you to stay late. Right. And it's triggering to her because of what just happened. But it's also like another message telling her to be a certain way. And she can't take it. And she pulls the phone out, which is kind of like, I'm not listening anymore. I can't take any more of those things. She destroys her apartment and all of these like images of kind of innocent femininity, girlhood. Yeah, it's a coming of age thing too, which is cool. And she makes it into something new, and she makes herself into something new. And that to me felt when she destroys the sign. It goes from like this,
Hello
yeah,
there to hell here.
hell
Yeah.
here, to just her saying what she's feeling and taking away the veneer. And so I feel like her putting the mask on is a lot more of her like rejecting that stuff, but becoming who she is. Right. So when the mask is off, she's not herself. But when it's on, that's like closer to who she's supposed to be.
So do you
Love
feel
that.
like in a way that like, I mean, this might be getting a little deeper than it is,
Yeah,
but
get deep.
okay. Well, like when the cats come, right?
Mhm.
And the cats are the catalyst for okay, had to. Thanks. For change. Is that if we take this as like her transformation, do you feel like we sort of need something external to come in, or like some sort of breakthrough that isn't just internal? Like that, because what I'm getting at, I think, is like this situation is she was a certain way, but then something happens to her.
Mhm.
She doesn't just like decide to be a different type of woman.
Mhm.
Something happens, and then her response to that is her authentic self that comes out.
Yeah.
So I just wonder, like, it's so hard, like in the culture, for us to be inundated with this messaging and then just come to the decision ourselves. It's almost like something has to happen to you, or you have to meet somebody different who speaks to you in a different way, or read something, or it's kind of like was there anything for you where it's like, aha, like I'm affected by this enough to where I want to be different? Because it seems like without that, then we're all just kind of like zombies or robots, just like going through the motions trying to conform.
That's true. I agree. So you're talking about like what was there a specific incident, like a specific thing that happened to sort of trigger thinking about this differently or living my life
Yeah.
differently?
Yeah, because like what preceded you being interested in this to where you were like, I actually want to study this, and then as you were going on, did anything kind of shift your consciousness where you were like,
Did.
aha, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
It absolutely did. I think when I started writing it in general, um, it did just kind of rearrange my mind a little bit, because there was a big break for me between getting my bachelor's and getting my master's. So I think it was just getting back into something that serious again. It took a while for my mind to rearrange anyway. But I do think really diving into this, and probably because it had some ties to childhood and images that I've been seeing forever and that I was drawn
Right.
to forever, and really asking myself, like, why though? Why? What was what? Why did it boil down to me finding those images powerful, even though especially the way I grew up, it was clear that those images were bad, or like a bad lady, right? So really digging into that was good, but I think just analysis in general, really getting into it a bit more heavily. There were just times when the light would go on a little bit
Right.
more than it had in the past. There were definitely times when I was writing about the two versions of cat people, and I would like start crying just because it kind of looking at um, just history. I think also delving into that, just looking at um, the the hardships of fitting into these images that were never of us really to begin with. They're all just sort of made up. And really examining that, but also wondering, like, well, what can I get out of that? What's the positive thing that I can get out of that? Because as I've talked about before, I think if you look at any feminist history and criticism, like it's sad. It's sad, not because feminism sucks, because it doesn't, but because the history and mistreatment of women is hard to look at. But the idea that you can look at this world of media that's sort of man-made and find something there and make something out of that that works for you. That's kind of having that leg go on was a big deal for me. So yeah, I think the writing process,
was like
my
cathartic.
long-winded answer to that question.
No, that's great. And I wonder, like, so in your, like, when you watch this film and she is presented as a villain,
Mm-hmm.
and she's definitely not a good guy.
Sure.
Like, in terms of the way the narrative is,
Yes.
right? Because Batman is trying to destroy her while also being like very drawn and curious. So do you feel like she is a true villain, or that she is in like survival mode? Like, how do you characterize like what her position is? Because I mean, a lot of these villains, I mean, this has kind of been a trend lately where I think somebody was complaining about this, like in Disney movies, where the bad guy is so empathetic that there's actually no bad guys anymore.
Yeah.
Like rotten characters, because we're all like so sympathetic.
Yeah.
Right. Which it's like it's good for when you're like a human being and you're dealing with reality. I'm not sure it's like good for movies or like entertainment necessarily.
Yeah, I think it's good to think about like the gray areas and stuff like that. But I agree, we're getting a little soft in that regard. I think
right.
And you know what? You can also have a villain who's very bad and weirdly sympathetic. Like, we've done it before.
Yes, so, and those are usually the most compelling.
Yes.
Is when like somebody is a total psycho.
Yeah.
And then if they can make it, if the writing and the characterization can make it in such a way that you actually feel somewhat like you understand them, and that makes you uncomfortable, that to me is the most effective.
Yeah, look at Anthony Perkins in
Psycho, Norman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like half of the movie, even after you find out, you're like, oh,
yeah,
poor bad guy, poor Statty man. But Anthony Perkins helps that situation. Yes. So true. In terms of her being a villain,
right.
Yes, I think she is the villain, but she is much more in the gray, I think. Because you really have three villains in this movie anyway. You've got the Penguin and Shrek, and so funny, his name is Shrek, and you've got her. And even the Penguin, like, he's pretty evil, but he's pretty sympathetic in his way, or he would be if he wasn't so lechy. He's so creepy, but you get where he's coming from. And so I think she's just like kind of the lowest one on the scale of bad there, but she is 100% motivated by revenge. Right? And that's something that Batman can't talk her out of, and that's something that ultimately does make her a villain in the narrative, even though the narrative is very fond of her, obviously.
Right. And she's having a great deal of fun.
Absolutely. And, you know, when I'm watching it, like, I'm rooting for her. Like, I want her to kill Shrek. I want her to take revenge on that. Which, by the way, is another sort of interesting thing about that character sort of wanting to wipe out the source of the messaging, the confusing messaging. Anyway, she blows up the store. The logo for the company is the cat, and she's kind of like replacing that with her own face. So her wanting to take him out entirely, I don't think is just because of what he did to her physically. It feels more like a bigger thing.
Right.
So I don't mind. I am rooting for her, but in the world of Batman's ethics and everything, it is villain. So yeah.
And I just saw, so you actually inadvertently spawned an entire marathon of Batman movies for me, because I watched
I'm so glad.
Well, I had to watch the first Batman in order to watch Returns, and then I was like, well, let's just keep going. So I did. I skipped Forever and Robin, and then the Schumacher debacles, and then did Begins and Night and Rises.
Excellent.
And I did think that between the two, I mean, I don't know if you'd agree, that Anne Hathaway does a good job, but it's not even remotely close to what I feel like Michelle does, and that Hathaway did not, is that raw magnetism, like almost like primal animalistic part.
Yes. Yeah.
Because Hathaway's just kind of like, I don't know, she's kind of smooth and sleeky.
Yeah.
Versus.
I know, and again, the tones of those parts of the franchise, I guess, are separate franchises, but the tones of those are so different. And I get that Nolan's world is very different from Burton's world and everything. So you can't really have that. And I don't know how, I don't want to put that all on Anne Hathaway, but I don't think it's a great performance. I don't think there isn't much sparkle to it, but I also don't feel that. I think that's like the only Gotham character that Nolan used and kind of made less interesting than what came before. She feels really shoehorned in there. And actually, if you watch it, you notice that she has very little impact on the narrative.
Yeah.
She's kind of just there. And there's some really fun stuff with her. And there's a lot to talk about with the ending, with her wearing the pearls and everything. But in general, she could have been a real shot in the arm to that movie, which I like anyway. But
yeah, it's okay.
As it is, it's just, she's not very interesting, unfortunately. But
well, and I think that's probably, I mean, not probably, that is definitely criticism that people have against Nolan at large, is that his women characters are typically quite one note. He doesn't really know what to do with them. He doesn't really know what to do with sexuality.
No.
And I mean, for me, without getting completely off, like for Oppenheimer, I do not expect him to be able to deliver. So that was not a critique of mine.
Oh, that scene just needs to go to jail.
Yeah, Katrina. I mean, I'm like, okay, well, this is obviously Nolan's.
When she's like, I like your bookshelf.
Maybe he's just talking out of his own experience of seducing.
Could be.
I mean, he's been with his wife for a long time, so I won't say that. But I feel like a lot of this is just like, it's his blind spot, and he's not able to do it. So he didn't do it with Catwoman, not nearly as well as Burton.
I think it's true, and it actually it's probably more to do with the writing. I think he's maybe not a great writer when it comes to character in general, but especially not women. Like I said, I don't think he's like a woman hater. I just think he doesn't.
No.
He doesn't know what to do. He's like, women, people, I don't understand.
So, he needs his brother. I've said this many times. Jonathan Nolan is a better screenwriter, in my opinion.
I think he is too, but I think he also struggles with the woman thing. Less so, much less.
The woman thing,
but yeah. I think he does. I did read that he talked Chris into including her in the third film. He thought the character was more important, but also I have that interview somewhere, but also even the way he talked about that character was interesting. It was the usual, like, oh, we need like a female character that like you can't trust, basically. It's like, so we got to shoehorn that in there. And that's, again, what I kind of feel like they did.
And you know what? I would almost argue, I don't know, I don't have his filmography in front of me, but I have seen all of Nolan's films, and I'm pretty sure that that would be a common thread.
Yeah.
Because you can't trust Maul in Inception. You can't trust Scarlett in The Prestige. You can't trust Carrie-Anne Moss in Memento.
Mm-hmm.
This might be a beef that they've got like deep down within themselves.
It could be. It could be, because I think you do usually have, it's the two-part thing, right? It's like the perfect wife who's probably dead, or it's the untrustworthy lady,
crazy lady,
which totally works in Memento, right? That character, right? I love her. She's great. But you see that repeated a lot, the dead wife thing and the untrustworthy lady, and it's tricky.
Although Hilary Swank in Insomnia was solid, she might be my favorite.
She was good.
She was good.
Isn't that movie also like a remake of something else?
Katrina. We'll leave it there. We love you guys who love Nolan. I love Nolan.
I know. Yeah. I love Nolan too. I really do.
He needs to work on this.
I really do. Like everything else, great. Good job,
great.
Chris. But it's just a minor complaint.
It's just a minor complaint.
Yeah.
Okay. So in response to returns, I emailed you and said, because she said is structured to where I will have a response film. I think I emailed you some choices, and then you were like, you liked Virgin Suicides the most.
Yes.
And that was one that you had given 5 stars.
Yes.
So I felt pretty confident that was like, I want to do one that you would enjoy.
Yes.
But that is the one I picked, which was from the seminal year of 1999, which keeps coming up lately in conversations.
Because it was a year.
It was the debut film for our darling Sofia Coppola, who's arguably made every movie since that is very similar in theme and emphasis. But Virgin Suicides is, I don't know that I would necessarily say that anybody's got like a Catwoman quality, but they definitely have the quality of being unknowable by men.
Yes.
So yeah,
I agree. I agree with that.
Tell me what you think about it.
When I think about that movie, I don't know. When I was younger, I even kind of felt like I wondered if the girls were even real at all, or if it was like something these boys, like a group of women, these boys had designed to kind of help them deal with their youth. And I don't think that's true. I think they're meant to be real people, but the idea is that they are this poor group of women is so unknowable because these boys can't fathom them as human beings. They are piecing them together in the ways that they can, in the ways that their obsession sort of, the colors their obsession sort of paint them in. Right. And they're sharing those things with each other, and together it's building like this mythology of what these girls are. And I feel like the movie in general is saying that these girls, you can't know these girls at all if you listen to these boys, because it's just, there's no way you can actually put them together.
But then do you feel like Sophia is also not letting us know them? Or do you feel like, because she's got the male narrator and she's got the boys that are like trying to gather the clues and put the pieces together and everything. So it's definitely their POV.
Yeah.
But Sophia is a female director, obviously. And so, but I feel like the way that she crafts this is such that we can't know them either. Like she doesn't really let us in beyond their limitations, strangely.
Yeah.
So it's like nobody can know them.
Yeah. But I think she does it. She's doing that very knowingly. Again, I think she's letting you know that these women existed, that they were real and they had feelings. And we see a little bit of that, but I think she very intentionally does keep them at a distance, because she doesn't really have her eye on them. It's so interesting because she's watching the boys watch the girls.
Exactly.
So it's this like female gaze on the male gaze. It's like commenting on that very thing. And I think that's really unusual. And I think that's what really stands out about that movie to me, because she really is commenting more on the coming of age of these boys than she is about these women.
And it's almost like that's what literally like me and you are doing.
Yeah.
We have like our interpretation, because this emphasis is on like the fact that we are women, right?
Right.
I mean, that's what this series is about, is like, I want to know specifically, because normally I'm not like gender centric, but this is really putting me into a frame of mind of like, well, when we talk about this stuff, we are female gazing the male gaze.
Yeah.
Of like trying to, because like I want so much to understand the thing for itself, but like, is it possible to remove your own lens from theirs? Like,
or are
maybe it isn't. I don't know.
Are they too wound up in each? Well, and in general,
right.
What I think is so hard about women in film, watching women on the screen at all. It goes back to Laura Mulvey talking about the male gaze, and one of her points was that you can't watch, like we were kind of saying before, like the history of these characters and the way women have been presented. You can build on that and try to change that, but you can't erase what's come before. We've been trained in how to watch these movies and stuff. And so one of the things that she said, which I disagree with, but she was saying the only way to get away from the male gaze in movies is to make like abstract, non-narrative movies, basically.
Oh, geez.
Which is like, well, no one's going to do that. But
no one, no, and it wouldn't be interesting.
I'm not going to spend my time watching that.
Right.
I want to enjoy the visual pleasures of narrative. But yeah, that was her take on that idea. And and maybe, I mean, in a way, maybe she's right, but we can still like build away from it. But yeah, I do think it takes a lot of work to separate those things, to separate. It's kind of like anything we've grown up understanding how to look at and approach, and then all of a sudden you're thinking, have I been using that word wrong? But
right.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to, like, when I saw Poor Things and came out of the theater, I felt the need to say, which I would not let myself say, but I wanted to be like, you know, as a straight white woman, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I felt that this movie was blank, instead of just being like, this is what I think about this movie.
Yeah.
And so I feel like what Virgin Suicides was doing, even though it's older now, I mean, the 90s were a long time from now, like a long time in the past. I feel like, was getting at that, like, wanting to know apart from yourself as being impossible. Like that you will always project your interpretation. You can't ever see something as it is. That's like one of the quotes in Birdman, where like, you judge the thing for what it is, not for how you see it. But it's like, how do you look at a flower for what a flower is, not your perception of the flower?
Yes. Yeah. Well, then you get into some real heady territory, because then it's like, how can we know what anything is? Right? how do I know that what I'm looking at is the same thing that you're seeing, and the same,
right.
and then you get into some really tricky. So I don't know.
We're back in Christopher Nolan's territory with our brains.
But my take is that's not bad. That history. The important thing is to know the history. That's what I think. I think it's good to. We were talking about context before, and I like the idea of going into things blind. But if you're really trying to work something out, I think it is really good to have the context and to know what you're dealing with. And I understand, like, not everyone's going to go to school and learn how to analyze movies and stuff like that. I don't think you have to, but I do think being thoughtful in general about your approach to that, especially, you know, where gender is concerned, I'm sure. And trying to wrap your mind around like what ideas about this came before, especially if we're talking kind of blanket imagery of gender or queerness or you know, race or anything like that. Like, where is this coming from, and how long have we been looking at this? And in your own history, what's familiar and what's not. And I think when you do that, like, it's exciting. It can be exciting because, like, oh, well, we can go different places from here, right? Or just like having, like we were talking about before, having that light go on in my head of just understanding how my own understanding of gender and other things and just relationships and people, how that was formed and what that has to do with what we've been watching all of our lives.
Yeah, and I think that another point to this too is that, like, there's, like, in Batman Returns, even though, I mean, it's a superhero movie and it's not really about Catwoman, she does have this growing up period, whereas Virgin Suicides feels very stuck.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. It's Arrested Development. It's like, you know, and I don't get the sense that any of the girls know themselves at all. And maybe I mean, I think that's intentional because it's an adolescent sort of focus. There is no coming of age because they literally don't.
They don't.
I mean,
Yeah.
they don't.
Yeah.
So in that sense, Virgin Suicides is very interesting to me because it almost doesn't even have an arc.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just sort of moves along, and maybe that's like representative of our that time period in our lives seems to just go on and on. Like you really want something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be older. You want to get out. Like you want to graduate. There's this sense of like, when is something going to happen? And so when their lives are disrupted by them literally dying one by one, it's like that is so unnatural to the order of
Mm-hmm.
things. So Sophia's doing a bunch of things
She
at the
is.
same time.
She is. I love her. I also love that she's adapting from a book that's written by a dude.
Written by Jeffrey. Yeah. And that was his first novel too.
Yes. Yes. And I really like that novel as well. I like the movie a little bit better though.
Yeah.
Because she's just pulling in a lot of different things and it still has that poetry to it, which I think is lovely. I think she's very good at that. But anyway, yeah, it does feel like what adolescence does kind of feel like, which is just stasis. I don't know about you, but it just feels like stasis forever, right. And then it's over. Right. And that's what it feels like the boys go through. They're kind of like encapsulated in their obsession with the girls, but it's also sort of what happens to the girls. Then it's just over. And they don't get what the boys get, which is to kind of pack up and move on from that. Though I guess they do metaphorically, but I don't know. So anyway, you could see that metaphorically, I suppose. But it is interesting to sort of think about it in conversation with Batman Returns because they don't have that transformation bit.
Right.
They can kind of move on from this thing. It does feel there is something similar in that, especially because the movie is so much about kind of making these characters in your mind. These girls are constantly, and maybe that is female adolescents in general as well, but these girls are kind of constantly receiving messaging themselves about who they should be. And I mean, we all do. And if they are listening, which it's implied, there's that great scene in the car when they're on the way to prom and the girls are commenting on the neighborhood and everything, and they're kind of catty. And it implies that like they pay attention, right? They know. Or when that boy comes up to Mary, or I forget which one it is, at school, and she's like, "Yeah, I know. We've been at school together forever. I know who you are. Right. Not to talk to me." Right. So they listen. Like they're really not on their own planet. So the idea that they've been receiving this messaging from, obviously Lux has, in different ways. And
I was going to say, Lux is really the only one that we get to know at all.
Yeah.
Kirsten Dunst's character. And the way that Trip happens, Josh Hartnett's character with her, is very, I feel like not at all typical of like how something would normally unfold. Like the way that it starts out, you think that this guy is going to be crazy about her forever, that like he's not gonna just ditch her.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's like so heavily romanticized from his end.
Yes.
And then
such a good point.
I'm assuming they sleep together on the football field and then he leaves her there literally like by herself in the dark, like with no concern whatsoever how she gets home or anything. And that it just like flipped a switch, like, well, it was over, like all that was gone.
Yeah.
I think is also very interesting because it's got that like, it's the thing that Catwoman possesses that like most women don't, which is that they have this period of allure, but then when they're conquered or the person gets what they want, they're discarded.
Yeah.
Whereas Catwoman seems like you can't conquer her.
Yeah.
You can't do that to her. In fact, she will do that to you. And that is very maybe empowering in a way, like you said.
Yeah.
Because that's not normally what happens.
Because it's frightening, right? If a woman, and by the way, when I talk about this in gender and men in general, I'm not saying all men or
Oh yeah,
even
no.
individual men, it's the idea of like this culture that we're in. And again, it's very constructed. So anyway, I love men, but
I understand. And yes, I'm not
I
on
have
the,
some male friends who might listen to this, and I don't want them to,
and you don't want them to be angry.
Yes.
No,
Anyway.
I'm never, just for the record, I'm never against. And it's not, this is more just about like, what do you think about this in your, as you being a female person?
Yes, which I love.
And me
and
being
I understand it and appreciate.
I understand the need
putting
to
that
do
out there. I probably shouldn't have to, but there it is. Anyway, but yeah, the idea that that here's a woman that is not discardable because her mystique is forever and
eternal.
Yes, and like even if you kill her, she comes back, which is amazing. Like if you try to get rid of her, you can't. You know, if you left her on a football field, she would probably just find you. You know?
Yes, and kill you for leaving her.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah, or at least, you know, lick your face and taunt you. Anyway, so yeah, so that contrast is interesting. Also, that scene in Virgin Suicides, it's just heartbreaking. I remember watching it for the first time and being like, I can't believe that. Because you're so right. The way it is set up and the way he speaks about her, even in the the flash forward interviews, the like still in the turning world and everything. It's like, but you left her because that was all you're still like romanticizing the person before you had sex with her. You know, it's like, but she's
exactly
person and you left her there, and that is just, it's rough, but it's a great image of it's a great example of the mystique being conquered and then what's left, especially because you didn't actually ever bother with the person. It was the idea. So of course,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. You really, I now like, it's through this conversation that I'm actually realizing the appeal, because I've been thinking like, oh, you know, it's that she's so attractive and she's so like mysterious, and I'm even drawn to Catwoman, and you know, there is this like, it seems to go beyond who you are or what you like. Like she just is. But then I think the deeper thing is, that she can't be tamed and she can't just be cast aside without consequences is actually powerful. But it's like, but why is that powerful? Oh, it's because we're normally like,
we even think of ourselves that way as being discardable, because that's again, that's part of the messaging that we've gotten, because femininity is like a commodity, right? And it expires and all those things.
Right. And that you have to compare yourself to even know where you're at. Like there's this metric that you're always going against, even if it's just like a metric for your own self. Like you can't even meet your own standards of beauty or acceptance or likability. And then compared to these other people over here, I mean, it's like, forget it. So yeah, I think that's really a powerful insight, Katrina, like that, you know, how do we sort of find the balance between those two things? Like, how do you not want to have revenge and destroy everyone, but then also not be left on the football field?
Right. It's a great question.
Like, what's the middle there?
The middle is, I don't know, finding I think maybe finding more humanity in, well, probably in both situations. You know, just I that's what it comes down to, right? Is like, we make such a big deal about gender in general, but the problem is that we're people and we don't really see ourselves. We don't even see ourselves that way. And that's a really like simplistic way to look at it. But I would say that, yeah, I don't have answers there, but I think just humanizing both of those types is the healthier way to do anything. Because if you have any kind of binary system, then there's always going to be like a negative side to things. So I don't know, like taking the power from like that Catwoman ideal, or from like the perfect, like a noble blonde or whatever, and really humanizing it, which is what we need to do for women in general. And we've gotten much better at it. But doing that with characters that we find aspirational or the opposite, and thinking about them as human beings, so we can start thinking about ourselves that way
instead of as ideas, like instead of as like fantasies, like that we can be real, but not some sort of like I don't know, like unattainable standard that like we can't meet ourselves, but then like not even trying to present ourselves that way. Because I think the schism, like the mental break comes when we have like a presentation that we can't actually live up to.
Yes.
So if you remove the not the allure exactly, but like if Trip hadn't been so obsessed and so enamored with who he thought she was, which is arguable whether that was her fault or not, like whether that was just something that he would have felt anyway, or if she was trying to put anything on. But I think that the more conscious we could be of who we are, the more that we're projecting what's actually true.
Yeah.
And then you can be liked for who you are, as opposed to someone finding out later that isn't you.
Totally agree. Yeah. Authenticity, that is probably the only way to approach it. But that's so easy to say, isn't it?
I know.
When, again, like what we were saying before, is when you have, I'm so conscious of it now, but when you have these images in your head of what's good and what's bad, or how your parents feel about that type of person, right?
Good
how
point.
Your exes felt about that type of person, that is, like what you're aspiring to, and like what exactly about that person like you would like to emulate. I think it's tricky. Again, it's hard to just like level out and like build yourself, or just look at yourself. I think that's hard. I think it's a really good thing to aspire to, that like that kind of authenticity. But yeah,
but it also can't just be baloney. Like it can't just be like you talking in a mirror giving self-affirmations that aren't true. It also does have to be true. Yes. It's almost like it has to be earned in a way, like where you, like the more that you express yourself in a way that isn't at war with what you actually think, like the more alignment you have with how I'm expressing myself is what I actually believe and what I know to be true. It's not just an advertisement for something that you don't actually feel. I think that practice of doing that over time is what makes your self-worth and your sense of self get more formidable, so that if you are abandoned, or you are, that you do make bad judgment, you don't just crumble. Like you're not just completely and totally, wanting to die. You're
not attaching like you said, you're not attaching your self-worth and your identity right to those aspects. Yeah.
I'm just trying to take like as much as we can to take positives from either film in terms of how these sort of idealized states are made manifest, and then like what do we do with them, and like in a healthy way, not where we're like trying to be something that we can't be, and then feeling bad about that.
Because that gets you nowhere. Again, I feel like history is important. I feel like looking at that, the context for those things, especially if you find things to be triggering in a good or bad way, or whatever, something that you really connect with. I always think asking why, and when I say history, I mean like personal history as well. Like, why is my connection to that thing? Or like, why is it devastating when I see Lux being left on the football field?
Right.
I think putting those things together is helpful, and I think can be totally positive. Like I said before, I think like it can be depressing looking at this stuff after looking at women's representation in film and what we've done with it, and but I think when you really are looking at it closely, it can be exciting, because I do think that frees you up to move forward a little bit when you kind of like undo the knots of the past, or when you look at them a little bit more closely. Like, okay, why is that character this way, and why am I feeling this thing when I see her?
Right, because that's what you told me initially when we talked. You were like, I don't see her as a victim. The reason that you see it as empowering is because it's not like she's helpless. The reason that they are wanting her eliminated is because they're afraid of her and they know that she has power. And so that's the other good point, is if you know the power you have, and then you use the power you have, and not in a purely self-centered, self-obsessed way, but like that I am capable and like I am competent and I can put good into the world. Like that sense, it does sort of make everything else pale in comparison and seem like just petty.
It's true. Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah. That is what I think is really sticks, I think, about this kind of research or thinking about movies in this way in general, is like you said.
What was your conclusion when you got done? When you finished your thesis, what was your, like, if you had like a takeaway that you felt like you could apply?
Like, just like personal ways of living, or what the again, just being able to analyze things a little bit better was personally helpful to me. But in general, about looking at this kind of huge, I mean, I think there are so many of these characters, like there are like subsets of them and everything, but and it's not, I was telling you this before, it's not just American cinema. There's a lot of it in Eastern cinema as well, which is very interesting. Kind of a different subject, but same idea. And yeah, I just think looking at how massive that network of this archetype is, of these characters, it was that, I guess the takeaway would be there has been quite a moving forward. There's also been I feel like kind of an acknowledgement of that network that you start to see in movies, even that have this archetype. It's more of an acknowledgement that this archetype is not solitary, and that women are identifying with her. Well, I'll say this. One of the coolest things that I read was talking about just after, it was about Batman Returns. And a few years after that, there was some show, fashion show, wasn't a fashion show, but it was like a displays of costumes at a museum. And they were doing superheroes. And the most popular costume that was on display was Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman costume. So there was always a crowd of people around it, and it was a largely female crowd. It was women who were like drawn to this and attached to that idea. And again, I think that there's something about that I think is really exciting. Again, that women are kind of not even reclaiming, but doing kind of what she does in the movie, which is making their own thing. There you go. Making their own thing.
There you go.
Out of all of these messages and ideas. And so there's something like very cool and exciting about that. And so I think that was a big takeaway for me. I think about just that bit quite a lot. And I like that idea. And I like, again, it does feel hopeful. It does feel like we're moving forward. And I think we have gotten, I don't know, maybe we're stumbling a little bit now, but I do feel like in general, we've gotten a lot better at media literacy and looking at that kind of thing. So that's a nice.
Well, and there's definitely like a revolt feeling. I feel like women now are very deliberately trying to combat older ideas, and sometimes I feel like it's a little bit far, but at the same time it seems reactionary. It seems like it's like,
True.
you know, like we're not going to be put into a box, or we're not going to be told that blah 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 blah. And I mean, I think that it's like, it's, to me, what I'm always like longing for is just that there's an equal amount of respect, like which seems like the bare minimum, I suppose.
That is true.
But like, just that, like, it would be nice to be in situations in life where me saying something to someone carries the same weight as a man saying it to the person, but we're not quite there where like I have the same authority to a guy that another man would have for them. And maybe that's just innate, and that's not something that's something that's kind of like primal, and not something that can be ever, I don't know, shifted. But there are like little things like that all the time in life where I'm like, I hope that someday this can feel more, I don't know, like that I carry the same weight.
Or that it may be, not to put it on you at all, but that it maybe feels more natural to assume that what you have to say carries the same weight. Because it's true. What you're saying is true. I feel that all the time. But wouldn't it be nice if we got to a point where we didn't feel that
at all? And that that your expectation for a situation would be that this person will take me very seriously, as seriously as, and it might not even just be like a man-to-man thing. It's also women. It's actually very difficult in some situations to not feel like the way that you, I mean, this is just for me, but like, where there's always like this competitive thing, or there's this like one-upsman thing, instead of it just being, so I wish it were across the board that we could all just approach one another evenly. And I try to be very conscious of this within my own self and how I operate. But it's hard, even like woman to woman sometimes.
It's true. Well, you know, internalized misogyny is real. I know a lot of misogynistic women, but also
oddly,
it's how we were what is it? How we were trained. What's the word? Oh my gosh. Well, let's just say that. It's how we were trained is the world view, right? Which is in a very small seed that women are less than, right? And so there is, I think, even though we know that up here, we don't always, there's still going to be maybe a little bit of a lag with how we operate interpersonally. And it's not just that with that issue, of course, but there is the idea that like the feminine is less than, so we're just going to be not as inclined to listen or pay attention or give credence to that, which is unfortunate. But again, I think we're working on it. But
I think what helps it is like being friends, like actually having like dialogues and people that you like and that you can get along with. And then it's like all these things are not so scary. They're just scary as constructs. But really, the more points of reference you have and the more interactions you have, I feel like that alleviates it a bit. But that sort of default setting is like, just, it's strong to like want to protect yourself and put yourself on the defensive, instead of just assuming that everyone's going to treat you like a whole human being or how they would want to be treated. But that's something that's just like true of all human beings. It's not just,
it's completely true. I've read the things that that focus on people that are specifically bigoted about one part of society or other, and then of course as they get to know anyone from that part of society, that starts to go away. I mean, not entirely. There's a lot to work through intellectually there, but it's the idea of the other, right? Like the unknown, and women can even like other each other, which is crazy. But there it is.
That's a good way to put it.
There it is.
That's a good way to put it. And that's what Burton specializes in. All his movies are about the other. All of them are about the fear of the other and the fear of like the differences, and how do we how does the different person operate in normal society, even though there is really no such thing as normal society. Like we all feel that we don't belong, and then we feel like other people do.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is it's been a great conversation, Katrina. I am so grateful for your openness, and these were very interesting movies to put together. But I recommend that as a double feature: Batman Returns and Virgin Suicides. It's a very interesting combo, and I'm glad that you just decided to do this with me. I think that I hope that everybody
Thank
likes
you
it. It's great.
so much for having me on. This was so much fun to talk about, and I hope that we talk again, actually, because this was great.
Oh, of course we will. Everybody follow Katrina B.
Thank you.
And we'll see you at the movies.
Bye.